All right, welcome everyone. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to provide comment during the public comment portion of the agenda. And we can also provide testimony to the board. They can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing us at utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. So PUB believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeting towards people that have been made vulnerable by systemic inequities. And this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. And so putting our principles into actions means speaking up and speaking out. Each one of us is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board, and we will focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, not the person.
Hi, this is Amy, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing. The chat is only viewable by myself, so please limit chats to technical and logistical issues, signing up for public comment, or asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not yet been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. Co-hosts may lower your hand once you've begun speaking to maintain the flow of conversation. If you're connecting by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on when speaking if desired. It's not required. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. And if connecting by phone, you may need to press *6 to unmute and unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with myself or raise your hand during the period. It also is available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. We have not quite reached quorum, but we are expecting our 6th board member to join us shortly. So we're going to hold on any official decisions, but walk through the preliminary information.
All right, so the agenda for the day is mostly discussing the year to come. What are our values and priorities for the policy and budget decisions that we are impacting, and also the PUB annual report and work plan. We're going to want to start our discussions on that. So first, I believe it's a disclosure of communications, if I'm jumping ahead. Does anyone have anything to disclose? All right. Oh, I see Karen has their hand raised. Go ahead.
I have nothing to disclose, but I was wondering if anyone knew what stream that was in the picture. It looks like it's kind of winter time or late fall, but
if there are no disclosures, we are turning this into a trivia round. Does anyone know what river this is?
Never mind. I was just curious.
It's a good question, and I don't recall, and I'm the one who put the picture in. So
this is why we got to cite our sources. We will get that answer for you, Karen. But if we have no disclosures of communications, we can continue on. Now is a time for public comment. You can, if you're in the room, you can raise your hand. Amy, do we have any written submitted testimony?
I do not have any that has been submitted prior to the meeting.
All right, so let's give a second for anyone who wants to raise their hand. All right, we got a small crowd, so it looks like no public comment today then. All right, so on to our first item, which is reviewing the August 1st pub meeting.
And actually, I'm gonna come back to this because we don't have a full quorum yet. So I'd like to make sure
Yes.
that we have full quorum before we approve the minutes.
Okay. No worries
So
on
maybe
that.
let's jump to the brief announcements that we had before we started.
Of course, of course. So yeah, I wanted to, we wanted to add an announcement before and possibly after. And this first announcement is really just bringing back the topics that we talked at the last meeting. Looks like we've actually been sent a survey on the presentation that we received on the first. So if you have the capacity to do that, please check your emails. I know I got one from Amy for that natural resources survey, service delivery survey. That'll definitely help the bureaus. And yeah, we had a leadership meeting yesterday with myself and Karen and Amy and a handful of all of the important directors and their peoples, just to kind of figure out what pub needs to do for this upcoming year, and what are our plans for what are our plans for the next 3 months or through the end of this year. And so we, of course, the budget process is ongoing, and we want to be mindful of how we're interacting with that. I do believe something was mentioned yesterday that we have the capacity to engage with by October 1st. Part of me is blanking on what that actually was. So if Amy, if you actually know what that update was, please jump in.
Yeah, so that was relating to the charter transition changes, and they'll be going to council with a citywide organizational chart that kind of defines what the structure will look like. We don't have a lot of information until it's getting closer to that date. But since anything that's submitted to council has to be submitted a couple of weeks prior to that, that means if pub wanted to engage on any charter related topics probably related to the structure, that October 1st ish would be the right timeline between now and then to engage prior to that. Otherwise, there will be new information coming out once that goes to council, and then responding to those changes and how they'll be implemented is kind of the next phase that they could engage in.
Yeah, so that is an opportunity if pub has the capacity to at least read and make commentary on, see if it makes sense to the work that we're doing and how the city is planning to structure the bureaus that we work under going forward. Alexis, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks for that update. I am curious what or how our involvement prior to that October 1st date could happen. I do think, I think that this is a priority for me for the upcoming year. And so I'd like to hear from bureau staff what might be some ways that we can engage before before the proposed structure goes to council. Like, what would that look like? Are we inviting presentations? Are they in a public comment and they just want to hear ideas from pub? Other ideas, I would really welcome the opportunity to engage on that.
This is Amy, and if I could respond briefly, and then if others have more information, a lot of the changes are moving relatively quickly. I think as there have been opportunities for public meetings or information available on the website, I've forwarded that on to pub members. But one of the issues, for example, that was raised by one of the Bureau leaders was that, there's group that is talking about security, and whether those services should be centralized, and there may be similar groups on different topical areas. And so if there are particular topical areas that Pub had the time and capacity and interest in engaging either individual members as representatives, then that could be something that I could explore with the lead staff with Office of Management and Finance that are leading that charter change work. So the question is, I guess, given the information that is out there, if there's specific areas of interest that individuals have the capacity to engage on, then I can try to identify whether there could be opportunity. I think for the citywide effort, they do have their own advisory group that is kind of convening around the charter change work. And so that is their primary engagement with the public, is through that. And then information that's going out generally that is the same information that I'm forwarding to you. And otherwise, I think the opportunities are limited unless we push in a particular area and can identify if there's meetings or folks to engage with on specific topical areas.
And thank you for that clarity, Amy. Julia, did you have something to say?
Yeah. I participate in another commission, and it's interesting to see how like one commission to another is kind of approaching this transition. And if it's possible for us to get a synopsis of the options that are kind of on the table about where we land and in what kind of department. And I guess that we're a little bit different from the other commission that I'm part of in terms of structure. And maybe that's not such a tidy answer, because I know that we're not even clear on exactly, which departments are going to exist and which one we would fall into. But I think that like the degree to which we can be given the kind of menu of options of what they're looking at and considering, so that we can weigh in as an entity about what structure we think makes the best sense for outcomes for people and the environment in the areas that we have influence over. I think that's really important for us. And I think it's reasonable for the city, whoever the appropriate folks are, to provide for us that kind of like, here are the directions we're considering, so that we can weigh in, and it's like, and I don't even know exactly how to I don't think it's quite fair for us to have to identify like, oh, this is the issue area that we want to dig in on. It's like, we need them to give us the information and for us to know where we want to dig in, So, and I understand you are forwarding stuff that is the publicly available information, but I think that there's, I don't know if we need to form a subcommittee where it's like Robin, or if we just want to deputize Robin if she has a capacity, and I don't know if she does, to maybe have a meeting with the appropriate directors to kind of try to figure this out. But it's just like, I feel like we should absolutely be weighing in on whatever top 3 or 4 options they're considering for how to structure things and where we fall into it. And I think that we shouldn't have to be able to know what we don't know to get that information. I'm not articulating this very well. I apologize. I just kind of dove into this meeting a little bit late. And but if there's any way for us to get that kind of organized outline of where they're thinking about going, in a way that includes information that may not be totally public yet, but that is available to staff. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure they have an idea of what they're considering and what's on the table, and we should be able to weigh in before they narrow that down much further.
Okay, yeah, I really like that idea, Julia. And I wrote down menu of options, because I agree we want to be mindful of how we're engaging this, because we will be umbrellaed under possibly a few different capacities. And it would be important for us as the representative of the public and the informed public, because we're on this group, to possibly choose the best option for the public, as to how to continue the advisory work that we're engaging in as we.
Or at least be able to recommend what we think is the best option for
Yeah.
the public, right? I mean, it's like, it's just like I just don't want it to be, as I think, I forget who said it, but the comment about how we don't want to be sitting at the table that was set for us. We want to help set the table, you know what I mean? And it's like, and maybe our advice isn't taken, but it's like, I don't want to miss the opportunity to weigh in on what we think is the best. And I think that the decisions are moving quickly, and they know kind of the directions they're thinking about heading, and we should be able to like weigh in kind of soon, about which direction we think is the right one. So anyway, I feel like there's got to be a way for them to give us that kind of menu of options of where they're thinking about heading, and for us to be able to weigh in, hopefully with a letter or in meetings. I'm not sure what the best format is, but that would be my request, is that they prepare something for us before decisions are made.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that could absolutely be something that we're focusing on in the remaining weeks of August, and then our 2 meetings in September, because I believe the recommendations are going to go to City Council in mid-October. And so it was recommended that if we do engage, that we are fully engaged in a response by the 1st of October, which would essentially make it so that we're putting, if we are engaged with this as a board, we're putting this on our plate for the month of September as one of the things that we're, pardon my pun, chewing on. So with that, let's go to Karen, and then I will say a few more things with announcements.
I think the only thing that I need to say at this point, after Alexis and Julia and
it's a timeline that we're using with the other commission that I'm on as well. So I don't, I think now is the time. We haven't missed the opportunity yet, but we just need to be on it.
Right. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah. All I was going to say is I agree wholeheartedly with what Alexis and Julia and Robin, what you all have said. And I just wanted to add to that, ask us to think back to when we wrapped up the budget comments end of last fiscal year, I guess, with before the end of the terms of several of our board members. And I'm recalling Lorraine speaking very eloquently about the idea of not having things fully baked before a new council, new council members, and new city structure is in hand. And Tom Lipton also spoke to that. And at the time, we had talked about not trying to dilute the strength of those comments by sort of burying them in our budget letter, but rather having a separate communication with Bureau Leadership Council about on that topic. So I think where you all are landing, I am totally on board with that. I think we have time. I think we do have, not a ton, but we do have September to put together, whether it's a letter or verbal testimony or whatever. And should we decide to form a subcommittee to do some of that legwork, I would be willing to be on that subcommittee, but also willing to step back if others have anyway more time or passion or interest or specific things they want to accomplish. Thank you.
Julia, do you have one last thing to say?
Just that I would also be interested in being on that committee.
All right, good to know. I'm writing both your names down. All right, so yeah, I'm actually glad that we touched in on this leadership meeting And so yeah, charter reform is always, it's very present in their minds, and it needs to be present in our minds, and also understanding that it's not on pub to envision the future of all advisory bodies, but we do have the capacity to offer our opinion on what we think is going to be best for the structures that we've been working in, and the information, that the feedback that we've been giving. How do we make our voice, how do we make the public voice through pub the most powerful? And so that'll be something for us to think on. And then yeah, we just field trips, we love a good field trip, and it's good to get to be in person with fellow pub members, having been virtual for so many years, it seems, at this point. So we're looking at possible site visits. I believe that Farshad had mentioned during the meeting that we should really visit Tryon Creek, because it is such a important project, and it's been the topic of discussion in this on this board many a times. And so I think it'll be important, an important place for us to visit. And then yeah, just being mindful that when it comes the work on pub, it really is best for us to always be to know what's coming a few months out. And so I think that this quarterly lookout, being in the mindset as a pub member, what you personally think we need to be focusing on in the next couple of months, what's that relationship to our budget work, but just thinking on, we do bi-weekly meetings, but I've come to realize that it's best to try to see what we're doing in the months to come to set us up for the best success. But with that, we can review our minutes now that we've got quorum on the August 1st pub meeting. So I'll just give a couple moments for members to review and raise their hand for anything that needs to be adjusted on those minutes. We need to add some wonderful background music to moments like these. Just another minute or so before we approve the minutes. Raise your hands if you have anything. All right, looks like with no additions, we are accepting the minutes as they are for the record. All right, so topic of conversation today is going to be our values and priorities for the budget and policy recommendations that we offer. So goals for today, just remind us what we said our values were last year, see if they're in the same place, see if we feel that we've stuck to them, and just being mindful of how we are navigating these esoteric values as we work with like budget numbers. And so we're going to hopefully develop our list for this year of our priorities, and just how we can affect leadership and decision making going forward. So Amy, did you have anything to chat about on this one?
No, I think that was the good foundation. So the 2 slides that I have are just intended to be very brief as reminders. I sent these materials out as reminders to members in advance as well. So this is slide summarizes the work plan frames, the kind of general categories of areas that you have evaluated programs and policies and budgets as they come before you, and areas of focus. And so the last couple of years have been some iteration of these frames. They've been modified based on the focus each year, but this was the most recent one. And then you also have had a list of values that has been established for quite a while and also been modified year to year, just as focus changes and minor wording changes to make sure that it's highlighting areas of your interest and values. So the challenge is that these values are pretty broad and they're also not prioritized. And it's been, I think, a conscious decision of PUB in the past not to prioritize these because it's challenging to pit one of these values against some of the others. But in practice, that then becomes challenging for bureaus and leadership to take that information and really incorporate how your values are prioritized and can be applied to decisions as they come up. And so the goal, I think, for today was to begin to brainstorm using these as foundations if you want, or starting from scratch and just brainstorming, but trying to work towards some more specific value statements so that as bureaus are considering trade-offs, you are clear about which trade-offs are worth it, which values are prioritized over others. And so that's the goal for the conversation today. And my intention is just to I'll pull up a blank document as we move forward to just kind of put your ideas down. And I can, of course, incorporate them more fully as I go through and do the minutes, but just open the conversation up to all of you as we move forward.
All right, so I'm actually excited for this part because this is my board commentary, taking my chair hat off. That we leaned really hard into value statements when recommending what we wanted out of last year's our most recent budget process. And from my personal perspective, it feels like we would have been more hard hitting if we had said we support this or we do not support this, rather than being like, well, these are my top 10 values. You decide if they align with what your values are while you're making the decision. And so I think it would actually be powerful for us to prioritize some of our values, not to say that we're listing 1 to 25 and this is my 17th most important value. It's to recognize that our best work is focused work. And so we have many values. It might be best if we prioritize 5 of them and we're like, in this upcoming year, everything that we're navigating, our top 5 things are this. So are we coming back to that? And yeah, we'll always have these greater values, but I think it would be powerful for us to prioritize a few of our values and to lean into what kind of trade-offs we actually would want to see in worst case scenarios, where instead of saying, hey, we support affordability in the community, we say, if you have to reduce the budget for community outreach because this happens, we are willing to give you X amount, or it needs to be a trade-off. Like we want quantifiable trade-offs, and that way our recommendations have more power. And that's what I would want to say. Go ahead, Karen.
Again, Robin, I should have it seems like today I just need to wait and have other people say things that I'm thinking. So I don't know, there seems to be a really good connection here, but let me say, I completely agree with the idea of focusing. And I have a brainstorm idea to maybe just throw out there and see if it gets any traction, or maybe just to have it on the list. And that is, given sort of the current most pressing issues and challenges of our time, right, over the next couple of years, pulling out those values that seem to be top of mind and perhaps the ones to focus on in budget decisions over the next couple of years. And I'll give a couple of examples. Two that stood out for me were the value that spoke to sustainability of infrastructure. I can't remember the exact wording, but this issue of I think that one's like particularly relevant, and we might consider focusing on that value in the upcoming budget season because of all we have been hearing, particularly from BES, about the backlog and the deferred maintenance, and how long term that leads to much higher costs, as well as poorer service delivery to very likely among our most vulnerable residents in the city. So it seems like that would be one that I would say, yes, let's elevate that in our budgetary conversations and focus areas. And another one, I'm not saying these would be the only two, but would be the watershed health, focus on watershed health. I not remember the exact words, but that sort of holistic look on how all water is connected, and how we right. So anyway, watershed health would be a second one that seems like is very timely, and with the potential formation of a like a natural resources unit, i.e. the conversations that we had last meeting. So those two kind of float to the top for me. And one more idea, and it's not about a focus area, but it's just saying that that doesn't mean we abandon all those other values, but more that we suggest that those are the kind of the I don't know, the considerations or the filters or the lenses that any decision sort of looks at the effects on all those things. So example, if we suggested that the Bureau's focus on infrastructure sustainability and holistic watershed health planning, okay, those are maybe the top two focus areas, but that still means that when decisions are being made, as Robin alluded to, kind of trading off, if there's a recommendation pertaining to watershed health, and that is still, the questions are still asked. How does that affect affordability? How does that affect workforce equity and racial equity? I mean, it's not like we're not still honoring those values. It's just we're treating them more as considerations or lenses, are the only terms I can think of. Yeah. So there you go. There's throwing that out there and let the brainstorming continue.
Thank you for that, Karen. Alexis, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, for kicking us off. And I'm always excited when I align with what other people have proposed. I also jotted down the sustainability of infrastructure and watershed health. That being said, I also want to raise equity as to one of the primary values. And I think it's essentially impossible to do our work without looking at it through an equity lens. Like when we're looking at sustainability of infrastructure, that to me is an equity question. When we're looking at watershed health, that is also an equity question because of the impacts on environmental health and on human health, et cetera. So I'd like to raise that one up as well. That I think it's the baseline for everything that we do, and then these others can be seen through that. But I agree with the prioritization of watershed health and sustainability. And then I'm curious about affordability as well. And I think that that's where we really start to get into the trade-offs question, and where pub can play a particularly valuable role in helping to think through the trade-offs across these three things. But I would put equity as like the primary lens, and then these other three things are really important values for us.
Go ahead, Julia.
I'll be quick because I totally agree with literally everything that that Karen and Alexis just said. I just, to me, it sounds like the equity is the like deep overarching value, and I like the use of the word lens that we use for all of the things. It's really the value that we are upholding when we're looking at these things. What we're trying to prioritize, to me, feels more like issue areas. And we're prioritizing through the lens of our values, right? What are the areas where we feel like we need to be able to give really substantive, meaty feedback that's not just generically like, do the equitable thing, but is actually like, here's what the equitable decision looks like in a resource constrained environment. You know, we understand what your options are, and here's a very real life option that we would recommend that we think is the better choice. Because I think what we're trying to do, right, is represent the public and what's best for people from a frankly different perspective. So I completely agree with everything that folks are saying, but I just, for me, it's like the framing that's happening in my head as we're having this conversation is that there's a little bit of a difference between a broad-based value versus a prioritization of issues and how we apply our values to those issues in a more concrete and substantive way. So I like the direction this is going, though, and I agree with what people are saying.
Thank you, Julia, and I appreciate that clarity as well. Because yeah, we are kind of we're kind of juggling prioritizing our values and what issues we're prioritizing to address, and those are intertwined, but we don't want to be juggling them together. Amy, if you would you actually scroll back up to the list that you had offered, just so just so people can keep bouncing off of it. Let's give people a second to see where we want to go. So I can jump in raising my hand as a member. With issue areas to focus on, I would like to have pub focus on people who receive their water through third-party vendors. So essentially people who don't have their name on a water bill because their apartment landlord essentially has the bill in their name. These people don't have representation through the Portland Water Bureau or BES because their name is not on that specific initial water bill. And there's also, of course, struggles to get financial assistance. And so they are a group of people in our community that need assistance, because currently the way that third-party water billing is set up, it actually disempowers the resident who is paying a water bill, but their name is essentially nowhere on the right document in issues of like financial assistance or a water leak. You call, it's not, they don't have the capacity to ask questions because they're not officially people receiving water bills through third parties and renters in Portland. This is Robin again. Not the most interesting or exciting, but I think regulatory compliance might be something that we do have to stick our heads into, just based on the fact that the water treatment facilities that are being built are required by federal requirements, and there has been a lot of pushback against that. And I think that it is to the public's benefit that we have federal water guidelines that are enforcing our local systems to upgrade. And so being mindful of what regulatory compliances the bureaus are navigating, because they are essentially unbudgeted items sometimes. And so they impact the money that we deal with. And so regulatory compliance seems important, especially with the treatment plants coming up. And Amy, could I have you scroll back up once again? Thank you.
So as you all are looking at the values, and based on some of the issue areas that you just prioritized, I guess I challenge you to think about some of how those can be put into practice and made tangible in the types of trade-offs that you have seen needed to be considered and will continue to be some of those trade-offs moving forward. For example, affordability being an important value, but in last year's budget cycle, the hub ultimately identified late in the process that there was support for the rate increases that related to funding certain priorities, like the financial assistance or the infrastructure maintenance that needed to be done, and being clear with some statements about how these values relate to one another and when those trade-offs line up with your overall values. So if there's any statements like that are people want to put on the table, that would be valuable, I think.
Alexis, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Amy. I think that is where I come back to equity being our kind of like guiding force and that primary lens. I like how Julia had framed that, is because for me personally, when we were discussing that, that meant that for me, because of the need for the RAMP program and to support that meant I was okay with the raising of rates because of the need for more equity in the system. And balancing that with some of the infrastructure needs. So I guess like for me, having equity as like the top priority, that helped me make that recommendation and decision from my perspective. So I don't know if I don't think I'm directly answering your question, Amy, but for me, like equity is the primary value. And I'm always filtering things through that first, and then considering these other things. Does that, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that was my thought process.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for, I think, challenging us to go there, to get to get specific and commit. I mean, not that we're committing to anything today, we're committing to thinking about committing, I think. But what you said, Amy, with your challenge, and Alexis, what you were just saying, particularly about equity and some other comments made, I'm thinking back to two folks who spoke very strongly on equity. Again, one was Lorraine back last spring, and I'm just remembering a couple things. One particular thing that she said that I'm thinking of as sort of context around equity conversations is, why is it always the expendable stuff? Why is it always kind of the afterthought? You know, why do we think about it at the end? And so that's one thought. And the other much less pleasant thought I'm having right now is about how we were attacked, challenged at the budget rate hearing when Sarah delivered her testimony and our testimony, and you know, the mayor and Commissioner Gonzalez, you know, sort of challenged us by saying, you all are throwing around the word equity, and you know, we think that we are being equitable because we're not raising rates on people that are struggling, right? So if we are not very, very clear and very specific with, we mean this comes before this, or we mean this doesn't come without this, then I think we essentially are risking our irrelevance, right? So those are two thoughts I'm having about challenging us to be very specific as much, right? I mean, challenging us to be specific, and particularly being specific about what do we mean when we quote unquote throw around the term equity. I'm not saying anyone is doing that, but we were accused of that. Let me just say that. Right. I'm gonna stop there and think a little bit more if I have anything to add to that, but that's where I am at the moment. I don't know how we do that, but you all probably have some great ideas.
Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, my thought on what Karen just said is I think that when we raise the value of equity as a reasoning for why prioritization is being made, we need to be extremely specific, although I read those comments very closely because I thought I was going to end up being the one reading them to council. And I feel like we actually were specific, and I think their critique was disingenuous and meant to genuinely intimidate and silence difficult feedback, which is really disappointing. And it does remind me, like that on a whole separate topic, I am really wondering if there was any actions taken, because I think that the way that Sarah, Messier, who made that presentation, the way she was treated, I think actually violated workplace rules. Anyway, that's a separate issue, but like, I think there were, like, I'm glad you brought that up, just because I think that was a wildly inappropriate response to legitimate input and feedback from a group of people that represent the public. It should have been received with a lot more humility and consideration. But that said, I think that we always just need to be very specific. We can start generally with a value, but then the recommendation, I think, needs to be very concrete for us. But I think that the bigger issue of why is it, and I know for my day job, I work on environmental issues. It's very similar for me, where it's like, that is exactly where cuts happen. That's where if something has to give, that's where it's going to give. I feel equity is very similar in that, like, it's on that margin because our institutions don't structurally work in equitable ways. So, and we are trying to change that, right? You know, so I, like, unfortunately, like, I think where we exist within an existing structure, the nature of the work is unfortunately going to be, I think, time and time again, we're going to be forced to be making these hard choices when we're doing substantive recommendations because of the existing structures. And that's why I'm so excited about the opportunities that are going to arise from the system change, because maybe we can start getting at some of those structural issues around equity. But I hear exactly what you're saying, Karen, about, like, it is absolutely not acceptable that this is kind of the sacrifice zone over and over again. And then for us to be effective and have credibility and power, that we're going to be forced to make these hard choices in our recommendations. But I do agree that if we're not, then our recommendations are going to be less effective and not as powerful. So it's just a hard needle for us to have to thread. And the problem is structural in a way that makes it hard for us to solve it. I don't know. I hope that was helpful. I apologize if this was too thinking out loud. But yeah, that's it.
All right, wonderful. I appreciate everyone's input. I definitely want to see Bob and Lorraine have some input as they have valuable viewpoints. And what I am seeing a general thought, which it feels like equity is our main lens, and we are focused on watershed health, addressing climate change, system resilience through all of that, and affordability, and understanding the trade-offs of what does it mean, what does affordability mean, and how are we being innovative to offer affordability. Yeah, with this one, I'm not sure that unless someone else has something to add to it, I'm not sure that we have how much more we have to give specifically to this without having the couple other members that could assist us. What are your thoughts, Amy?
Yeah, maybe we can open it up. I'll send this document out and ask for their feedback. But in the interim, I guess I would just continue to challenge you all that where we could turn this broad value into a statement that gets more specific touch base with me, and I'll put that on the list to send back out to the full pub, so that the next time you look at this, you'll be able to dig a little deeper, kind of getting to a little bit of that specificity. And remember that, these are good for council to know, but it's also important for the Bureau leadership, because it is helpful to them if they have more clearly stated values as they're putting proposals into the budget and weighing decisions that will be put before council. So it is your opportunity to be having that influence at the earlier in the process instead of at the very end. So.
Karen, go ahead.
Yes, I would find it helpful. So my understanding of sort of why we took on this exercise, and I don't mean that in at all a dismissive way, but just the work that we were just doing was a first step in being able to have conversations with Bureau leadership around budgetary decisions, or at least budgetary proposals, right, at this point. And to be able to be pretty clear where we stand as the bureaus are putting together their proposed budgets for next year. So I would find it helpful to have some feedback from Bureau leadership about, well, I guess two items is where we're going, even with just the conversation today. Is this moving in a direction that you as Bureau leaders will be able to sort of take it and sort of sink your teeth into it, I guess, and be able to, just be able to sink your teeth into it. So that's, is the direction we're moving seem like it's going to be helpful to you? And second is, I'm reacting to a couple words that you said, Amy, about, putting this into some kind of a statement or some kind of a written document. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but we do that anyway. That's how we have sort of operated for many years, and I don't know, I'm starting to feel like that's not sufficient. It might be necessary. We have to document everything, and it's public information, and there needs to be a sort of a long-lasting record. So I'm not at all opposed to needing to continue to document things and statements and letters and that sort of thing. But it also, especially this year, just sort of felt colossally unsatisfying, right? I mean, especially where we ended up. So my second piece of, I guess, feedback that I'd like from Bureau leadership are thoughts about what are other ways that we can convey this information, whether that would make it more, I don't know, kind of actionable in your budgetary decisions and so forth that you'll be having over the in the fall. What are other ways that we can convey our recommendations besides putting them in a statement or putting them in a letter? Attend some of your meetings, have work sessions. If there's anything now, that's great, but maybe we could put that on the list for next meeting to have a conversation about that if there's nothing today that people have.
Personally, I would say I also, it's not just the bureaus and the bureau leadership that need to be reminded of our values. Having navigated this space as a pub member, it often feels like we come to our work plan, we state our values once a year, and then we do work towards those values, but we're not checking in on those values to remind ourselves, like, hey, is the work that we're doing in mid-October one of the values that I said I was a part of? And so I think it would help us as a board also to, from at least quarterly, to be like, hey, just a reminder, we set our values in August, were equity and affordability. Are we staying true to those values as we navigate what we're planning out for our meetings? And are we staying true to those values every time we write a memo? Is that memo related to explaining how this is specifically a push for equity and XYZ? So yeah, it'll be good for us as well as the Bureau. Looks like Farshad from BES has something to say. Go ahead, Farshad.
Hi, everybody. I'm just responding to Karen's invitation to chime in on how values land with the Bureau. And first, I really have to applaud the very thoughtful comments that you all have made today and have made in the past about what's important to you all and your representation of the community at large. I think it's been very important to have that consolidated in a set of statements that you've given to the bureaus. I want to speak just from BES's perspective. I heard frustration in some of your comments, Karen, and I hope you know that Bureau staff and leadership have also been frustrated by just the uncertainty and a lot of the fire drills that have come up in the management of our work over the last year. I know that has made it seem like Bureau leadership has been inaccessible or unresponsive to the concerns expressed by the board. And I think there's nothing further from the truth. I think it's just been very challenging for us to do what we think is the day-to-day and find space to connect the specific values that you've all expressed. I think there's been some ideas that have been generated recently, having board members participate as an actual member of some of these discussions within the Bureau. Not triggering a public meeting, but being able to actually have some insight as to the discourse that's happening within the Bureau, I think is a really interesting opportunity that I'm personally willing to explore. So I also think that there's going to be more opportunities for the Bureau to express the values that the leadership and Bureau staff have generated. And I think comparing pub values against Bureau values, there's not going to be a lot of daylight between those. I think we may use different terms to say the same thing, but I think there's a lot of similarity in what is motivating our work. So I just think that more opportunity to collaborate and to share and to engage is going to help. I think there's also we'll also be challenged to just be patient with the swirl that the city is in right now, maybe limiting our ability to dive deeper into our shared interests. Thanks.
Thank you, Farshad. All right. Does anyone else have any issues or values that they wanted us to focus on for that finalized list, or for that list before we move on? And I was going to say, I think this conversation really leads nicely into the next one, because if I'm to understand, this next part is actually us kind of zooming out with the annual work plan and seeing if we want to stay in the same, stay focused on the same items as we go forward. I'll need a little help from Amy on this one. There we go.
Yeah, Robin, you're right on that. The two conversations absolutely connect, and just responding somewhat to Karen about the reaction to documenting in writing. I completely understand how unfulfilling that often is, and it's one of the ways to document and both hold yourselves accountable, but also be able to point back to information that was provided. I also heard from at least some pub members in the past. I'm remembering, for example, when you were giving input on the hiring of the BES director, that at least for the member that was going to be sitting in that seat, they wanted something that they could refer to so that they made sure that their comments were in line with what pub was advocating for. And that can be important if you do find yourself in a meeting, to be able to differentiate between personal opinion and, representing the pub's voice generally. So before I move on, Juliet, you had your hand raised.
I think I'm being just a little dense here. I'm a very literal person. I think it would just be helpful for me to understand through example, I guess, what that kind of specific language would be, because I am in a similar place with Karen, but like I'm trying to envision, is there a way of formulating the right words in paper that is a value statement, but somehow more substantive, that leads to different outcomes? Like what, or at least gives us the standing to have more authority. I don't, because like I feel like generally talking about equity as an overarching value and then using that to create more substantive and to uphold like our more like substantive feedback on specific issues makes a lot of sense. How do we bake into an equity or value statement around equity or whatever else we want to have a value around that has teeth, but is also still general enough to be a value statement? I feel like I need an example to understand what that would look like. That's where my struggle is.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying conceptually, but I can't imagine what the words are that doesn't involve actual specific examples of, like, for example, an equitable decision in this situation would look like X. You know what I mean? So I'm being maybe too literal and struggling with the exercise.
Well, and it could be that, I'm off base too, but in my idea, I heard from council the push for, kind of being clear about whether you were supportive of the rate increase or not, right, at the initial work session. And so then you saw the fallout of the decisions that were made that didn't line up with what pub would have advocated for. And I could see that there would be value if I were one of the bureaus, just putting myself back in when I was doing budgets with bureaus, being able to be clear about the information that I received from our advisory board and how what I was putting forward with the budget lined up with their values. And so an example of something more specific might be something around, affordability is a priority and we're very conscientious about rate increases. However, the board is supportive of rate increases that are necessary in order to maintain the infrastructure and not increase the backlog of maintenance. Or something about, I think Karen had said something about the rate increases related to funding ramp, which you did do at the end, and using that as an example of when there are financial assistance programs that impact some of the most vulnerable and those that we identify as a focus, such as renters, then we support the rate increases necessary to do that. Or if you want to not increase rates and push to make cuts, then be clear about where you think those cuts could come from, because otherwise I think it is impacting programs that you care about, like the financial assistance or infrastructure maintenance.
I hear all of that, but that does mean that we're actually baking specific examples into our value statements that are inevitably going to leave out unexpected, scenarios. And I feel like the bigger issue is that we should be approached before these decisions are like made and presented to the city council. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like the issue on those areas wasn't so much that our values were unclear to staff or whatever. It was that we weren't consulted in the middle of the process. I'm just struggling with this. And I'm sorry if this is coming off as argumentative. I don't mean it in that way. I just think this is a tough one. This is a tough needle to thread.
Yeah, I hear you. And if the board doesn't see value in getting more specific, that's my suggestion. But if there's not agreement around that, then I accept that. I'm trying to find ways to make your voice as effective as possible. And so even when there are some specifics, I think those specifics can be examples, not limiting. And that the broad values are still the focus, and the specifics are some of the examples of when this type of issue comes up, because we can't necessarily anticipate what the next issue is, and may not have the time to have been consulted. And so knowing where you stand and then being able to hear from the bureaus how it did or didn't line up with your values is then that next step, if it didn't happen in the process.
No, I totally hear you. And I apologize. I'll stop after this. I think I can now wrap my mind around how we could get more specific in a general enough way that does a better job of making it clear that in reality, when you are faced with these decisions, this is the way we would like you to approach it, right? You know what I mean? So I think that there probably is a way for us to write that in there that won't hopefully be perceived as like limiting, but actually just adding specificity to like how we want them to handle situations in general. So like that, I thank you for walking through this process with me, because I don't have a suggestion right here and now in this meeting, but like I feel like I could like, and hopefully other folks on in the commission can also now kind of start wrapping our minds around what that language could look like. I don't know that a live public meeting is a place where you can wordsmith such a thing, but like at least now I can wrap my mind around kind of what that looks like. So thank you for that direction.
Karen, looks like you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you. One more thought to really add on to Julia's comments is, for me, I don't envision, and I certainly wouldn't advocate for us like creating a new values statement. I mean, I think the values statement that we have, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and it is our values. So what I'm hearing is that we are talking about formulating some kind of a, well, let's call it a document for now, that is a prioritization or refinement or sort of a finer point on our very broad values. And I would say a way to, for me, I think a way that I would be, I think a way for us to do that is to make it very specific to these times. Like, because values and prioritization, and they do change, and they have to change, right? Based on real-time decisions and challenges that, you know, public bodies are faced with. So if we can perhaps think about this not so much as sort of a new and improved value statement with some specificity, but more a communication about, for the next 2 years, for this transition period, you know, within the context of decisions that bureaus need to make, here are, you know, and then, you know, here are the you know, the primary, you know, issues that PUB recommends that the city focus on, and here are the, you know, criteria or lenses that we expect that we are all looking through. Or, but for me, it's like making it timely and making it tied to where we are now in the greater political and public context is that's kind of where the specificity can come from. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll think more about it too before we pick up this conversation next time.
Yeah, I think that that was a powerful point, Karen. We've been talking about the potency of our recommendations, and I think that as the future is yet to be decided, it makes sense to be timely with our recommendations, to make it what's happening with the people of Portland right now with their water bill, what's going to impact them the most. So with that, my understanding of the annual report, with just what we have in front of us, is this is essentially a list of the things that we have done in the past year, and this is what we've done, the list of our accomplishments. So please look at the screen quickly, and are there any accomplishments or topics that we have discussed that we think that we should add to our highlights reel of the past 12 months work with PUB?
And I will be sending out additional information to you all, because I am working on trying to put this into the actual report format. We don't have a lot of time in the meeting today, but I guess this is just the appeal to take a look at the information, what you've worked on in the past year, and let me know what areas you want to highlight. So usually in the report, there's some things that's just very logistical, you know, looking at, you know, what was on your agendas, and that was that prior list. And then pulling from that, what are the areas that you want to have a little extra written content about. So some of the recommendations that you've made, whether there have been any impacts or challenges, you know, that you want to highlight. So it isn't just highlighting the areas that you've covered, but also identifying the work plan for the coming year and any areas that you're hoping to focus on. So some of the conversation that we just had will feed into that, and I'll try to integrate that into the overall work plan, as well as kind of the topic areas that you've identified at the end of early in summer, as you were talking about where you wanted the board's scope of work to focus. So I guess this is just the opportunity for each of you that if there's something specific you want highlighted, let me know. And particularly if you have specific language, but even if it's just generally what the topic is, and I can start to craft something, and it just helps give you all something to edit instead of create. So that's the goal as we draft the report. As we looked at the beginning, you know, one of the kind of areas is those work plan frames, and I can reorganize that a little bit based on some of these focus areas that you talked about in your values. And then we'll get you some draft language to react to. There is a timeline commitment because your report is by code due in September. And so that's the timeline that we're working on. We can always make exceptions if necessary, but that we try to achieve. Any questions about the annual report? And I think I sent a link to the prior years just to give you a sense of what it typically looks like for those of you who are newer. Karen.
Hey, Amy, I don't have a question. I have a suggestion. We might want to have a short section on our ARC participation and invite not so much an accounting of how many meetings Pub members attended, although I think that should probably be in there somewhere, but invite Pub members. Again, it's going to be just we're missing folks that obviously aren't with us anymore, but to see if we have any insights or learnings or observations from the ARC meetings we did participate in, and we might want to have a really brief section in the annual report about that. Yeah.
Great suggestion. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, one of the things that I think would be helpful is we all know that we have a maintenance backlog, that maybe we should get a report showing, are we improving? Is it getting worse, getting better, staying even? And I realize we necessarily couldn't give that, but maybe requesting that from the bureaus so that way we can see what's going on. We know it's a problem, but I don't think that we really have a good handle at a pub level. Are things improving? Is it getting worse? Are we staying even? And it doesn't need to be like we've got 10,000 projects or something fairly high level. I don't need a list of 700 projects that we can't get to, but we have 700 projects and we think we have a X amount of years to complete this work. We've got 5 years worth of backlog, or we got 6 years or something like that. So that way we have an easy judge, or not an easy, but a better handle for us to tell what's going on.
Great suggestion. I'll follow up and see what information we can get.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, sorry, I just have a really quick thing on the work plan frames that maybe it falls under like the interagency and cross-sector collaboration piece, but we started off this conversation talking about charter reform and how to get involved, and I heard, at least from some of us on the call, like it's some enthusiasm about remaining engaged there. And so I think as we look to the work plan next, this upcoming year, that's an important one for us to highlight.
All right, so with that, I think we'll wrap up this part of the conversation. And did we have any outgoing announcements, Amy?
I did have one, and that was there is the Northwest Public Employees Diversity Conference. I think we mentioned this previously on October 10th. It's a full day conference that is for staff, but in the past, we have been able to secure some spots for pub members who are interested, and we cover the expense of that in the pub budget. And so the conference is full, but I'm trying to secure some extra spots. But in order to do that, I needed to know if there were any folks who were interested and definitely available that day. So if you are, please let me know soon so that I can put you on the wait list and follow up and try to get us some spots for that.
Amy, is that just here in town?
Yes, sorry, it's at the convention center. And so it starts in the morning, goes through the afternoon. I think there's maybe 3 different work session. So there's different opportunity for different topical areas that you can register for. And then there is lunch provided and a guest speaker during the lunch hour as well. And I've attended in the past. It's a great conference. There's a lot of great learning and speakers who are engaged in that. So I'd highly recommend it if you are interested and we're able to secure spots for you.
Remind me, I'm sorry, can you say the dates of the conference again?
It's October 10th, 8 a.m. to 5:30 at the Oregon Convention Center. All right. So I think that brings us to the closing. Robin?
Yes, it does. So I think what we got from today's conversation is that we have interest in adding something into our September conversation about hopefully we'll have a menu of options, which I appreciate Julia saying that, about charter reform options. And so I'm assuming either the 5th or the 21st we'll be wanting to add that. But yeah, looks like we've got Portland Water Bureau Smart Discount Pilot Program that we need to discuss. And actually, yeah, we'll need to be finalizing our annual report by the end of September. So make sure you get any good feedback. Is the annual report the place to say that one of your hiccups was when you actually brought it to the mayor and city councilors? Or does that make the annual report too spicy?
That's for you all to decide. That certainly is an opportunity. And because typically, so by code, when you do the annual report, there also is the opportunity to do a work session before council. And typically that's sometime in the fall, winter, depending on what else is going on. Sometimes in coordination with the commissioner's office, PUB has opted not to hold a work session or to postpone it and time it around other things going on. So that may be something that we need to discuss in September. I planned to have part of our conversation when we are finalizing the report.
All right.
And
Go ahead. Any last words?
I just wanted to make one comment on the record because a member of the public had messaged directly, and so I thought it was something that we didn't mention about our leadership check-in. There was a question about ex officio members because it was noted that ex officio members have not been in attendance. That we do have one ex officio currently, Joe, who is out on leave, and so we'll be engaging when he returns to the office. There are 2 other vacancies, and the bureaus are currently working on the identifying the right folks to fill those positions. So we do expect to have ex officios starting later this fall, and Joe will be back as well from Water Bureau.
Wonderful, and we are excited for their expertise. All right, so with that, meeting is adjourned.